So you found a great product in a profitable niche, but where in the world should you source that great product from for your private label business? First off, what is private labeling? Well, private labeling is when you buy a low-cost, off-the-shelf product, usually from an offshore supplier, and then make slight changes to it and sell it under your own private label brand. Now, even Amazon sells over 150,000 private label products. Once you've found your great product idea, the next step is to scour all the available sources and find the right supplier. Let's take a look at the best places in the world to source your private label products from. The first place I would look into is the world's factory, China. China is the second largest economy in the world, next to the United States. It has the most advanced import-export infrastructure in all of Asia and over 1 billion people in its workforce. Along with that, it has over a decades-long experience in manufacturing. Importing from China is the go-to option for many e-commerce sellers, and it will be for the immediate future. But it's not without a couple of drawbacks. First, let's talk about the big advantages that China has over almost any place else in the world. China's advantages are its skilled and massive labor workforce, coupled with its manufacturing and infrastructure. This means that you can find a supplier for pretty much anything in China. Its experience in both low-cost and high-tech manufacturing also means shorter lead times and simpler supply chains. It's also very easy to find suppliers on something like Alibaba, whereas it takes a bit more time and research to find suppliers in other countries. In fact, it can be like finding a needle in a haystack in countries outside of China. And now let's talk about some of the disadvantages. China has been in a trade war with the United States now for several years, and it's not going away anytime soon. The high tariffs and trade barriers that's been slapped on China by the United States, and vice versa, can be a bit of a pain in the butt and expensive for e-commerce sellers. Labor costs in China have also soared over the past decade. So much so that some Chinese companies have even found themselves in a position to have to move part of their production to a nearby country like Vietnam in order to cut costs. Other problems include growing environmental concerns, non-compliance with labor standards, and other factors that are driving costs up. The second country we'll be looking into has been called the quote-unquote next China, and that's Vietnam. You can look at Vietnam as what China was a couple of decades ago. It has a very low-cost labor workforce, low-tech manufacturing, and a similar form of government. While the US-China trade war continues to take place, US imports in Vietnam rose by over 40%, while those from China dropped by roughly 14%. But why Vietnam? Well, Vietnam is one of the biggest manufacturing hubs in all of Southeast Asia. Its labor rate is half of what you'll find in China, while sitting just right next door. It also has the added bonus of having 4 massive ports on the South China Sea, being able to import raw materials from China easier than anywhere else. Vietnam also has a track record when it comes to quality. Several big-name brands like Nike, Apple, and Samsung have outsourced a good amount of their supply chain to Vietnam. Vietnam is also part of the Free Trade Agreement like ASEAN and the EU-Vietnam Agreement, which means that Vietnamese factories are obligated to comply with strict manufacturing standards. Vietnam's biggest exports include electronics, garments, textiles, footwear, and headwear. You can also find some food and beverage products from there too. And incidentally, these are among the top product categories in Amazon in 2021 and 2022. India is another great consideration when looking for countries to source from. They're sometimes called the mightiest of the MITI-V, which are the 5 Asian countries set to replace China as the world's factory floor, or at least a top pick. It's similar to China in a couple of ways because it has a massive population of 1.3 billion people as of 2019 and an active labor force. It also has decades of experience in low-cost manufacturing. But why should you source from India? Well, India is the 6th largest manufacturing country in the entire world. Its labor cost is roughly 6x cheaper than China, though its workers aren't quite as skilled by a large part. This means it cannot really compete yet in terms of high-level manufacturing. This can be a blessing and a curse when it comes to sourcing from India. As China continues to scale into high-tech territory, India could pick up its slack in the low-cost manufacturing realm. English is also an official language in India. It could be easier to negotiate with suppliers from India rather than those based in China or Vietnam, where the language barrier is going to be much harder. Another selling point of India is that India manufacturers have a better history protecting intellectual property than their Chinese counterparts. It's also among the top digital nation, and experts say that India could be looking at a huge chunk of the market for electronic assembly in the years to come. Big brands like Conway and Apple have started to invest or build their own factories in India. India's biggest exports include textiles, home decor, handicrafts, jewelry, accessories, mobile phones, electronics, eco-friendly products, and leather goods. Some of the challenges associated with sourcing from India include the lack of infrastructure that China boasts. Its manufacturing is composed of a lot of mom-and-pop size factories, and that means that scaling your production will be a big problem when sourcing from India, or at least it can be. But for startups, Indian suppliers are happy to offer low MOQs to win your business, and they can be quite friendly. Not interested in looking at countries that are in Asia? Well, look no further, because Mexico is next on the list. Mexico's biggest selling point is how close it is to the United States, and this means lower shipping costs and shorter lead times for your products to arrive. It also means that you can be more hands-on in the production process to ensure product quality if you live in the United States or Canada, because you'll be in a similar time zone. On top of that, you also have the US, Mexico, and Canadian agreement, which aims to remove tariffs and make doing business much easier across these three nations. Labor costs in Mexico are significantly lower than those of China, but not as low as India or other countries in Southeast Asia. If you're interested in Mexico for your product sourcing needs, well, great, because Mexico's manufacturing industry specializes in medical devices, metals, textiles, garments, leather, consumer goods, and so much more. So if your next product idea is any of these categories, it might be a great idea to look into Mexico. However, if your next product idea is within food and beverage, electronics and machinery, or maybe something like rubber products, then Thailand might be a solid choice for you. The land of smiles is characterized by a mix of agricultural production and high-tech manufacturing. Thailand is also a key beneficiary of the Belt Road Initiative, a China-led campaign to develop infrastructure and accelerate economic growth. The one downside is that it has a very high labor cost, so trying to source labor-intensive products might not be the best of ideas. These are the top countries for sourcing private label products, but some other notable mentions include the MITI-V, which we mentioned earlier, also includes Malaysia and its cousin Indonesia. Malaysia is a rich nation and is amongst the highest-ranked countries in the region in terms of ease of doing business. Indonesia and the Philippines are both fledgling archipelagic economies with a dense population. This means they'll be able to offer competitive prices for labor. Now, this next suggestion might sound a little controversial. If your focus is on product quality and brand building, sourcing domestically is the way to go. It's easier to oversee production when working with a local supplier, and consumers will often regard locally made products as higher in quality, or they'll have a personal affinity to it at the very least. Sourcing locally also means shorter supply chains and potentially better relationships with your suppliers. I guess the big question now is, how do I get started on finding suppliers outside of China? For most countries on the list, you'll be able to connect with suppliers through online directories, the most popular being Alibaba and Global Sources. You'll be able to find suppliers based outside of China on those sites, but there are also websites that offer a selection of manufacturers and trading companies for specific countries. A couple of big ones for India, for instance, are TradeIndia.com and ExportersIndia.com. VietnamExport.com is a good place to start for Vietnam, and ThaiTrade.com lists suppliers based all throughout Thailand. There's a lot of these websites out there, so it's relatively easy to find suppliers after doing just a little bit of research on our friend Google. What are your experiences on sourcing from foreign countries? Got any tips or tricks that might be useful for our audience? Let us know down in the comments below. So please don't forget to like this video if you learned something new, and subscribe to our channel for more e-commerce content. And until the next video, happy selling. We'll talk to you soon.